It's not uncommon for games to have cut content. Depending on your taste, it's actually very common. RPGs are the most prone to this, and the Shadow games are no exception. So today, let's look at what Monolith had considered for Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War, but never quite made the cut.
Take him to Mordor. Goodbye. Say goodbye to the knife that you sharpen with your life. Say goodbye to the dark side.
Greetings, fellow Gravewalkers, and welcome back to another video. We're going to start with Shadow of Mordor, which has a surprising amount of cut content. I want to start by bringing up some things the devs said were being played with, but never came to pass. The first being a third region, something hinted at in a Reddit AMA from 11 years ago. Well, it wasn't long before the release of Shadow of Mordor, the wording of the devs made it sound like another full region, but as we know, there isn't one. The only thing that could be considered a third region is the Tower's Fortress in the mountains of Arid Glamhoth. Although I hadn't noticed it, someone said the area is actually larger than you can explore when fighting your nemesis, making me, and the original person that had that thought, wonder if it was initially intended for there to be more at Arid Glamhoth. Another thing that had a lot of emphasis was a kraken-like monster similar to the Watcher outside Moria. Many orcs and even the human characters have a decent amount of dialogue about bad things in the water and, well, a smoking gun in the form of the Nirn Fishery Appendices entry, which, like, yeah, what more can I say about this? There's a giant kraken in the picture. What more? How much more solid does it have to be? There's also an artifact in Shadow of War referencing squid-like monsters in the water, so I wonder if this was also considered for Shadow of War as well. I'd imagine if there were any models, animations, or scripting for it, we'd have discovered them by now, but I have no idea, because I have no idea where to start with checking the game's file. Something interesting that was confirmed to have been cut is the Great Beasts, something I didn't know had been fully planned and scrapped when I talked about them in my 10 Tiny Details video. Apparently Talion would have been capable of climbing up and riding them, but it was cut from the main game initially, and then from Lord of the Hunt later. They now remain as a simple reminder of what could have been in the appendices and Torvin's journal. For the rest of the Shadow of Mordor part, I'm looking at the cut content page on the Shadow of Mordor wiki, and there is no sources or references, so this information may not be 100% accurate because of that. And as an aside, most of the concept art listed here is actually from War in the North. I personally believe 90% of this stuff was featured in early writing drafts and were dropped very early on, seeing as a lot of the stuff mentioned takes place outside of Mordor, but does seem like it would have fit a cohesive game had it been gone with. I'm going to go top to bottom on the page in alphabetical order, starting with the Barrow Wights and Barrow Downs. Supposedly, the Barrow Downs were originally in the writing process for Shadow of Mordor, the place where the Black Hand was going to be doing all his dark magic and rituals. This likely was cut very, very early, since no hints of that intent are actually shown literally anywhere. Same with having Barrow Wight enemies that would reside there. The town of Bree was also likely featured in the early writing, since it is semi-confirmed that Talion was originally planned to have grown up there instead of Gondor. There's also bits and pieces floating around that Monolith were debating if he should be Rohirrim early on as well, though that's not exactly listed on this page. Next is deleted creatures, though deleted isn't quite a good description. This list is actually pretty neat because it includes some things I've said would have been cool for Shadow of War to have given, like good and bad orcs and goblins. This page also lists Oliphants, which makes a lot of sense given the Great Beasts were cut, and Revenants, which would obviously appear in Shadow of War. Wargs and giant spiders are a neat feature here and are very understandable, along with fell beasts. It's somewhat rumored that the Nazgul were also originally planned for Shadow of Mordor, even mentioned in the appendices that one of the in-game fortresses was the home of the Nazgul at one point. I cannot remember the name of that one, though I will put it up on screen while I'm talking about this. It's one of the big ones right in the center of the map. I'll come back to this point in a minute, though, because the Fell Beasts relate to another entry. Next is another relation to the Nazgul, and that would have been Dol Guldur, furthering my belief that Monolith originally intended Shadow of Mordor to be a much bigger game during the early scripting. Dol Guldur would be the home of the Nazgul, which is kind of accurate since it is now controlled by Khamul, while Sauron returned to Mordor proper. Coming back to the Fell Beasts, we would have the location known only as the Dragon's Lair. Obviously, the idea being that a dragon would assumedly reside there. I for sure know this one was cut early on, since by the time the lead devs did their AMA, they confirmed there would be no flying creatures in Shadow of Mordor. Beyond that, no dragon was ever mentioned either on this page or anywhere on old forums. So I'm not sure if maybe it was supposed to be abandoned or maybe linked to one of the other cut locations? We return to the fact that most of these are linked to War in the North with the Etten Moors. This one is actually kind of weird and requires a bit of explanation. The page states the Etten Moors were going to be the home of Bargrazar, a name that should be familiar to players of War in the North, as this stone giant is a main antagonist who lived in the Etten Moors. Now, a fun bit of trivia that's actually pretty important. War in the North was made by Snowblind Studios, who was merged with none other than Monolith Productions in 2012, meaning devs and writers for War in the North were also working on Shadow of Mordor. Shadow of Mordor taking place prior to War in the North, because the latter is during Lord of the Rings proper. With that knowledge, this makes way more sense, and shows they wanted to feature Bargrazar before he was corrupted into service of Sauron. The giant spiders mentioned before also come back for the next entry, Mirkwood. There's not a huge amount known about how Mirkwood would have played a part in Shadow of Mordor, only that it was considered and giant spiders would be there. Continuing stuff from War in the North, though, we have Nordenbad. This location would have been Torvin's original home and is also from War in the North. This one I'm kinda sad got left behind, since it could have been a great DLC. I wish Lord of the Hunt had brought us here, because that would have made it way better. Possibly the weirdest location they could have considered is Rivendell. I honestly have no clue why Rivendell would have been considered unless Celebrimbor would seek Elrond's aid. Maybe before he remembers who he is, but ever since my one theory video, I kinda assumed Celebrimbor was lying about the amnesia, since when he's brought back at the end of the Bright Lord DLC, he says his iconic line,
"Finally, all will fear me and rejoice."
That line makes it incredibly difficult to tell whether or not he's lying about how much he remembers. But like the rest of this, Rivendell would have been cut long before the story was finalized. Lastly on this page is Umbar, a location in Harad. I again really like this one. Exploring the Great Mordor Southeast would be awesome, and it remains relevant that Mumakil and Great Beasts were originally considered heavily. You know, I actually gotta throw this in. I just read through this page again, and it says it's a list of cut content for both Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War. So, some of this may have been intended for Shadow of War. If I had to guess, Dragon's Lair and the Etten Moors might have been intended for Shadow of War instead, but then every entry says it's cut from Shadow of Mordor, so, I don't know. We're gonna jump to more actually confirmed stuff, though. It was mentioned by a comment on Reddit that a longer fight with the Black Hand and a group of dwarf hunters were also intended. I'm not shocked that the longer fight with the Black Hand was cut, since the battle always seemed super boring and basic compared to the hammer and the tower. I imagine the dwarf hunters would have been friends with Torvin and potentially played a part in Lord of the Hunt. Lastly is concept art for Black Guards. Assumedly, they would have been guarding the Black Hand during his extended final battle. It is interesting, though, that this name would be rolled into Shadow of War as the Outlaw Tribe's gear set. That just about does it for Shadow of Mordor, so let's hop over to Shadow of War. Starting us off is Baby Caragors, mentioned by the devs as being cut early on, and frankly, I'm slightly glad they weren't added, since killing them would be pretty sad. The biggest cuts from Shadow of War is the different Siege and Orcs system, which can still be seen in some old alpha trailers, and a good amount of armor and weapons. Honestly, Shadow of War has some pretty boring cut content, considering how much of this stuff was confirmed to be cut from Shadow of Mordor. And with that, we've just about reached the end of this video. So, Like always, I do have a Fortnite supporter creator code, so if you play Fortnite and you want to support me, you can use code WreckingBallBlue in the item shop. And with that, we've just about come to the end of this video. So, if you have enjoyed, consider hitting the like button down below because it tells me that you like the video. And if you like what I do and you want more of it, consider subscribing for more. And if you'd like to know whenever I upload, you can ring the little bell to get notified whenever I do so. With that, I will see you all next time.